Hi, welcome to this week's demonstration here on the Beauty of Pastel. My name is Bethany and today we are painting a beautiful pastel sunset. I hope you enjoy. Okay everybody, welcome to today's video. As you can see, I'm working on a piece of old UArt. This was actually a trimmed piece, and so this area down here, I am just going to choose to cover that up. UArt is great. You can layer all kinds of stuff on it, and it's pretty tough. But what we're going to do today is a sunset. Whenever I do a sunset painting, I really want to avoid putting the horizon line in the middle. Going across, and then I'm just going to make this general line of these very dark trees. Most of these trees are in silhouette, and there is a highway. Obviously I took this when I was in probably my husband was driving, and we just saw that beautiful sunset, and there's some really distant trees. Drawing these shapes. I'm going to go ahead and draw these shapes actually. And it extends all the way out kind of to there, and there's some up there. It's really loosely sketching, and this is a pretty thin, long cloud. And there's a gap where there's just sky, and then there's some wispier clouds off in the distance, and those come right up against the shape. And then there's these very dark sections down here. And then it almost, where the sun is, right there, I'm just going to leave that open. Let's start with pastel. I usually like to start my initial rough pastel. I am going to do an alcohol wash. I kind of like to choose the tone, especially for clouds, of the darkest part of the cloud, and then working my way up in value. The same kind of concept as trees, starting from the darkest, working to the lightest. And this particular reference, the clouds definitely have a violet to rosy tinge, of course then moving to this very, very warm, bright orange, peach and yellow right in here. But I'm not going to put any purple there because I want the colors to be pretty pure. And so right now I'm just putting in the darker values. This is a Giraud pastel. This one is a little bit more medium in its consistency, and I'm using an incredibly light touch. If I was to touch my hand, I would just be tapping. Just barely. I'm not pushing at all. I'm just gently touching the paper, scumbling that on, kind of glazing the paper in a very gentle manner. Now I'm going to put in new pastel. This is a rosy violet kind of tints. It's not quite pink, it's not quite lavender, but it's like kind of a mauve. And this is a great color for that top where it's getting a little warmer, a little lighter. And I'm going to blend all this together whenever we're putting on more of the alcohol. Not being too precious about where I'm putting it, although I am following the shape, but I'm just still tapping around this sky. I'm just going to whisk those colors together, following the pattern that the clouds create. And you'll see that using the brush allows you to create thinner washes, moving this pastel around. Some parts can be very dark, and then when it drips and glazes the paper, it can be a little bit lighter, just depending on your strokes. You don't have to use a fan brush. You could use any type of brush you're comfortable with. I like the fan brush because it just kind of creates movement. I don't always use it in skies. Sometimes I just use a flat. But I just grabbed this one because it was handy on my table. Just working around, not worrying about this dark part down here from an older painting that was trimmed. Just working on the sky and this pastel, getting these layers softly melting into the paper. I am going to work this cloud form down into where I sketched out this tree shape, because then when I add the tree shape, it will go over the cloud and there won't be a halo around where, you know, the sky meets the land. So just continuing to work. If you want to go back in and add some pastel, this is new pastel, over even the wet layer of alcohol, you can do that. Just be very light, because it does, since the paper is wet, it does change a little bit how it affects the paper. But really, I'm just impatient, and I want to get to the rest of the piece. And I also have to hurry. Sometimes when I'm working in my studio, my kids are on their way home or something's going on and I don't have a huge block of time to create. I know you are the same way. Everybody's busy, and working small and working with the tools that help me the most helps me be more efficient, and it gets a painting in my pocket. I stepped away for about 10 minutes, went and grabbed a bite to eat in the kitchen, and came back, and my alcohol is dry. It's nice and flat. That's what I love about UArt, is that it doesn't buckle at all with alcohol. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start cutting in some of the sky shapes using, this is just a very gray blue. I'm just kind of following the shape. I am looking at the reference here just to get the general shape of the clouds and the sky in this general area. But right now I'm just kind of scumbling in, using also a very similar light touch, this sky layer. Now I'm moving up a little bit. This is a little slightly darker value, but I just want to start. There's a gradation as we go from horizon to higher up in the sky with how dark the sky looks. This is a pretty dark grayed turquoise color. Just kind of cutting in, not being too careful at this point. Cutting around all these clouds. This is a really dark. I'm going to put this in at the top, and I'm going to use my fingers and gently pull it down. I am using, this is UArt 400 grit, so it's not super, actually it's 500 grit. It's not super rough. If you're using a 280 or a 320, you might have some sore fingers at the end of the day. You can also use pipe insulation, and that will help too. Go back in with that same color that I used. Now I'm also going to go back in with that same mauve new pastel, just to kind of, you know, whenever I was smoothing it, I lost some of those edges of the clouds, and so I'm going to try to get some of them back just very lightly. Now I'm going to start bringing in some more of the yellows and the light. We've created the shadows. Now let's add some light to especially the undersides of these paintings. Since our sun is down here, it's shining up, and so that's why in this particular section especially, this higher part of the cloud is darker and you can see the light underneath. Once again, using a pretty gray, this is a very gray golden color. I don't want to add those pure tones just yet. You can use a little harder marks in this area. These marks are a little bit more defined, and just going to add some really pretty touches to your painting. And I'm adding just touches of this light sweeping up into the piece. I use harder marks. For very, very dark foregrounds, I like to use straight charcoal. It's the right value, and I can build on top of it with greens or blues or whatever I want. But it just gets me to a dark value pretty quickly. I will also put this in with rubbing alcohol. I'm going to use the same brush and actually the same alcohol. I'm not rinsing it. It doesn't really matter since this is so dark, it doesn't affect it if it has residual pastel from the sky. So I like to save as many steps as I can. You'll just notice that just adding that charcoal really makes this seem so much brighter because it has something in contrast to it. Now, oftentimes people that I encounter, that I teach, they're afraid of using the darker colors because they just feel so dark. And sometimes if a piece isn't working, we don't know why, it's great to take a picture of it and then turn it into black and white, and then you can usually see that maybe your contrast isn't strong enough and you're using mostly just mid-tone pastels instead of that value range. This dried really, really quickly. I'm going to re-establish this dark tree line, and I am going to follow. You can see that there is slight definition. Since this is a road, I think I will paint the road. So you can see that there's this shoulder area right here where the trees higher. There's a little grassy areas. There's some, the very distant tree line. I'm going to reestablish that. There's a road over there. Distant fields, a little darker. Now I feel like it's time to add some of the more orange highlights. I haven't really added any orange yet to this piece. I also want to darken this lower cloud a little bit. When I washed it in with the pastels, it made it a little too light. Soften it against the trees. Distance, the edges are softer, and so you can just gently wiggle your finger around on those distant tree lines to create a softer gesture. The closer we get, the edges would be harder. This is just the refining stage of the piece. Since this is such a small pastel, daily painting doesn't have to take long. It can take 10 minutes or 15 or half an hour. The point is just to practice, and this size is excellent for daily practice. And then you can take it bigger if you want. Some dark spots within this area, and they get very thin. Clouds get thinner as they recede, as they go away from us. The clouds that are above us are fuller because that's our point of view. We're looking more up. As we look out, clouds get thinner. And so clouds in the distance have a lot more just a line versus big fluffy thing. This is dark. Okay, now I'm going to go back in with that same Rembrandt. As I was adding it, I decided I needed the foil of the darker contrast of the purple for it to slightly blend with. You can use the side of the pastel to press and flick up. If you do that, sometimes old pastel will stick to it, so be careful that you have a clean pastel to work with. I'm going to add the sun, setting sun, to create kind of the halo. I'm using a slightly lighter Richardson. Sorry, it's hard not to put my head right in front of the camera. To create a layered effect. I have to do it a few times to get that halo effect. If you smudge some down here where you don't want it, just add the charcoal back. You can also take a hard pastel. Going to add some pure whites, although this is a very creamy white. This is a yellow white. Just to add a little bit more variation. Just doing a lot of thinking here. Always cut back down into what you've painted. Okay, and I'm also going to use the same gray down here. Although that to me feels so light. Let's see. It's actually blue. These dark foregrounds can be challenging. At this point though, I could always change it if I wanted. Adding some this is actually a very, very dark green. Just to add some light and a little bit more definition to this grassy area. Now it looks brown, but this is just a very dark green, but you can see that it created an edge between this land and then this tree. Trying not to put my head right in front of the camera. Soften your edges towards the foreground. If you want to add a glimmer of more pure green, try to limit it to closer to where the light is instead of put a hint of it over here possibly, but just very little. I'm actually going to add, the stripe. I'm going to use a really dark, this is a dark, well it's not super dark, it's a dark-ish Carbothello. And what I've decided to do, so we have 1 point perspective here because we've got the road going off in the distance. So in order to get a more accurate rendering of the stripe, I'm going to put the ruler in the center where the disappearing is really probably more up here because there is a little, it's flat. But I'm going to put the ruler with the point at the disappearing line, and then I'm just going to move it without moving the point straight down. And these pencils are a little thick. And then I just make a line, and it automatically, those line up with the same point, as you can see. Now there's also one over here. It's actually a yellow stripe, and we're on this side of the road. That's what the photo shows. I'm in the right lane, and so this lane actually, we're not going to do it like, we're not going to do the stripe quite the same. I'm going to call that finished.
I hope you enjoyed watching that pastel come to life. It was so much fun to paint. It's always fun to teach you new techniques, and I hope you learned something. If you did, please give this video a like. I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel and hit that little notification bell so you can know when a new video comes available. If you'd also like to help support this content coming out, every little bit helps. I would love it if you would consider visiting my Patreon page. The link is right here. Thank you so much for considering it. Thank you for spending your time with me today, and I will see you around.